Welcome to the Fantasy Hall Exchange, where you can exchange anything you want or all the items in this world. If you want to trade here, you must provide equal value for exchange. Of course, money is worthless to me. If you trade with demons, be prepared to sell your soul. Looking at the slogans on my own exchange, fantasy felt very good, although there may seem to be a lot of characters, it doesn't matter as long as someone comes. Yasumi Hirata. Can you really rescue Shiba? Fantasy. Of course, but the price of the transaction is for you to become my maid. Xiaolan. Fantasy, can you help me find someone? Fantasy. Of course, I can help you with anyone you want to find, but what price do you want to pay? Feilu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Chapter 1. Fantasy Hall Exchange, and Jingzi's. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Welcome to the Dream Hall Exchange, where you can exchange for anything you want or all the items in this world. To trade here, you must provide equivalent value for exchange. Of course, money is worthless to me. If you trade with demons, be prepared to sell your soul. Looking at the slogans on my exchange, fantasy felt very good. Although there may seem to be a lot of characters, it doesn't matter as long as someone comes. Maori Detective Agency is a very normal detective agency, inhabited by a father and daughter, a third-rate detective named Maori Kagoro, and a karate expert named Maori Ran. It is somewhat famous in this area. If there are no mistakes, the reputation of this detective agency will continue to grow in the future, because a certain Reaper elementary school student has already given answers in another world's comics and animations. And in order to get closer to the plot, Fantasy opened its store next door, called the Fantasy Hall Trading Office, abbreviated as the Exchange. Here, you can exchange what you want, whether it's goods or money, fame and status, or even a healthy and long-lived body, or someone else's life. As long as you can offer something of equal value, you can exchange it. There are rumors that this is an office opened by a demon. Inside the exchange, there lived a young man with black hair, black pupils, and yellow skin. He was not tall, strong, nor short, thin, or weak. He was a typical Easterner, wearing a white T-shirt, white casual pants, and a white coat. His attire was somewhat unconventional, but it didn't seem to matter how he dressed up. What was important was that he had his own office at a young age, although it seemed a bit absurd. The boy's name is Fantasy Dream, a strange name, and he seems a bit strange. Currently single and living alone, he doesn't seem to have many friends. If you have to say anything, because he often used to eat and drink, he can barely be considered friends with Muri Lan and Muri Kagoro, although Muri Kagoro has never treated him very well. The exchange, like the Mori Detective Office, does not have much business, and even worse than the detective office. It has been open for several years, and it seems that there has not been much business. This comparison seems to have given Mori Kagoro a sense of achievement, so he has a slight liking for this young man who often comes to work around, although this liking can be almost negligible. That night, the boy Fantasy stood in the office of the exchange and looked out the window at the scene. Nightfall had already fallen, and now it was already night. However, there were not many people on the street, the only one left was the neighboring Muri Lan pulling a little boy towards this side. It seemed that Muri Lan was going to take this little boy home. Has it started? Fantasy patted his chin but didn't touch his beard, so he felt relieved. The exchange's business is probably going to increase too. As he was speaking, he saw Uncle Maori running down the street and jumping into a taxi. He left with Xiaolan and the little boy, not knowing where he was going. However, judging from Uncle Maori's anxious appearance, he must have been entrusted. If I remember correctly, it should be about that little girl. It seems like I should go and open the first transaction on the exchange with that little girl. With a decision made, the illusion did not delay. I casually took a bite from an apple placed on the table and then went out to do business. We can't just wait, sometimes we need to be more proactive. The exchange is not a detective office, and if we just wait, there won't be any business coming to us. According to the memory in her mind, the incident of the little girl being kidnapped was actually a scene directed and performed by the little girl and the butler. However, in the end, the little girl actually encountered a robber and was kidnapped. In school, the little girl seemed to have seen a chimney. However, the so-called chimney was actually a building, but from a side view, and because it was at night, she mistakenly thought it was just a chimney. So, it should be this way. After looking at the building, Fantasy shifted her gaze to the other side, where there seemed to be only one school. So he didn't waste any time. He walked slowly towards the other side, still holding an apple in his hand and biting it. In fact, he didn't like to eat apples, he just liked to drink apple juice, or rather, he liked juice. But now, he can only make do with it. The school is a primary school, and there are not many people at night. Fantasy walked in here and quickly found the location of the little girl. Without much thought, Fantasy kicked the door open and walked in, seeing the little girl tied and thrown aside, as well as the kidnappers on the side. The kidnapper saw Dream and immediately took out a knife and aimed it at Dream, roaring angrily, "Who the hell are you? Do you want to die?" Huanmeng looked at the kidnapper with a disdainful smile on the corner of his mouth, and didn't say much. However, the kidnapper seemed to be angered by his smile, and he rushed towards Huanmeng with a knife, wanting to directly kill the troublemaker who suddenly broke in and kill him. Sometimes it's really easy. However, Fantasy is not an ordinary person. Faced with the rushing kidnappers, the disdainful smile on his face is even more obvious. With an apple on his hand and a fist clenched in his right hand, his figure moves. In the next second, his fist is directly imprinted on the kidnapper's nose, and the huge impact instantly collapses his nose bridge, blood shooting everywhere. The kidnapper has already fainted due to the self-protection mechanism of his brain, and his body flies back uncontrollably, eventually falling to the ground motionless. He took out a tissue and wiped away the bloodstains on his hand, then threw it directly onto the ground, snorted lightly, and continued to bite the apple. He squatted down in front of the little girl, who didn't seem too scared. He looked at the dreamy girl curiously, and the dreamy girl smiled again at the corner of her mouth. "Open your mouth." Upon hearing Fantasy say this, the little girl was a bit confused, but after blinking her eyes, she still slightly opened her small mouth. Seeing this, Fantasy stuffed the half-bitten apple into the little girl's mouth, and then helped the little girl untie the rope. Then, she took the apple back, identified the location of the little girl's tooth mark, and took a bite. Well, the taste of the little girl is really good. If there were a slightly older person here at this time, they would definitely look at the illusion with disgust on their face, and a term would also come out of their mouths. Pervert. Or maybe it's a psychopath, it's not a good thing to say. However, the little girl didn't understand. She just looked at the big brother who had squatted in front of her and saved her with some confusion. Fantasy was also looking at the little girl. She was a very cute little girl, probably 10 years old. "Little girl, what's your name?" "My name is Jingzi, big brother." "Who are you?" "Me. I am the demon that has descended into this world." Huanmeng's mouth curved into an inexplicable smile, looking at Jingzi with a puzzled expression. He continued, "I am currently running a Huanmengwen trading office. If you have anything you want, you can exchange it with me." "Exchange? Is anything okay?" Jingzi, whose eyes lit up, quickly asked, and the smile on Huanmeng's face seemed even brighter. "Of course, as long as I can do it, then there is nothing that cannot be exchanged. Can I ask my dad to spend more time with me, then?" Jingzi quickly said, with a slightly gloomy expression as she spoke. "My dad is always busy with business and doesn't have much time to play with me." "Well, there's no problem at all." Fantasy said, "This is just a small matter for him and it's easy to do." "So, what do you want to exchange it for?" I can pay. This is not possible. Let your father accompany you. It involves time. If there is time involved in the exchange project, it cannot be solved by money. Let's try a different approach. So. What do you want? Jingzi couldn't say anything, so she had to ask what Huanmeng wanted. Upon hearing this question, Huanmeng touched her chin and asked, "What do you want?" After thinking for a long time, I couldn't figure it out, but as I looked at Jingzi, my eyes rolled and a smile immediately appeared. Okay, since you were my first trader and made my first business deal, I'll give you a discount. Just do something very simple. As he spoke, he threw the apple core on his hand aside and hooked his finger on Jingzi's chin, leaning closer to the little girl's puzzled gaze. So, Fantasy Dream is just a beast. Taking advantage of the young girl's ignorance, he directly snatched her first kiss. Although she was only a 10-year-old girl, he was fortunate enough to take it. However, perhaps as he himself said, he is the demon who has descended into this world. I don't know how long it took, but the little girl who felt a bit suffocated pushed the body of the illusion with a pair of small hands. The illusion didn't continue, but let go of the little girl. Watching her blush and gasp for breath, a smile curved from the corner of her mouth once again. Is it fun? The little girl responded with a daze, as if she understood something, but also seemed to not understand anything. What happened on this day made the little girl a bit overwhelmed, but what is certain is that this night will be unforgettable for her forever. Huanmeng didn't say much, but took out a business card and handed it to Jingzi. After she picked it up, she said, "Put this away. It has my phone number and address on it. If you want to exchange anything in the future, feel free to come to me. Now, let's take you back and fulfill the exchange just now." After finishing speaking, Jingzi reached out her hand and put away her business card. She held on to Huanmeng's hand, and as she walked, she instructed, "The specific details of the exchange are only known to the two of us. If anyone else knows, I have the right to suspend the exchange." Hi. Regardless of whether she understood it or not, Jingzi still responded. A pure and delicate hand was caught by a dream, and although she didn't understand anything, she felt inexplicably at ease at this moment. Unlike the feeling when her father or other uncles and aunts pulled her, it always gave people a feeling of infatuation, perhaps like a brother, or some other feeling. Anyway, Jingzi's little head didn't understand these things. The two of them quickly returned to Jingzi's home. At this time, Jingzi's father was still discussing the case with Mori Kagoro, the neighbor of Fantasy Dream, while Xiaolan and the little boy named Conan were on the side. Seeing Fantasy Dream bringing the little girl back, they were both shocked. Huanmeng didn't care about these things and directly brought Jingzi to her father. With a smile on her face, she said, "I am Huanmeng from the Huanmengwen Exchange, and Qianjin is my client." Exchange. Jingzi's father was a bit puzzled, and it was also difficult to figure it out at this moment, but Fantasy didn't explain as much. His voice seemed to have some kind of magic in it, saying, "In the future, you need to spend more time playing with Jingzi, understand?" "Yes, I understand." Jingzi's father nodded without hesitation. Seeing this, Huanmeng smiled again. With special abilities, he couldn't refuse. He handed Jingzi back to him and then waved his hand directly at him. "The exchange is complete, goodbye." After finishing speaking, I left directly. It's still more comfortable to go back to sleep at night. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 2. Trading with Yuko Ikazawa, Takechiro. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the morning, the Maori Detective Agency had a customer who arrived early in the morning. This customer was their neighbor, the Fantasy Dream from the Fantasy Hall Exchange. Mori Kagoro, who was reading a newspaper, saw the Fantasy Dream and immediately curled his lips. "Cut it off. Here's another one for eating and drinking. He glanced at the little boy yawning on the side and said, and there will be another one for eating and drinking in the future. Dad. Xiaolan said angrily, then smiled and looked at Fantasy Dream who walked into the door. Good morning, Fantasy Dream Lord. Good morning, Xiaolan. Huanmeng smiled and said hello, then looked at the little boy on the side. The little boy also looked at Huanmeng strangely. Although he had known about such a neighbor before, it was the first time we had met officially. Xiaolan then introduced them with a smile, Huanmeng Jun, this is a child of my friend Dr. Aga's relative's family, named Conan, who is currently in foster care here. Conan, this is our neighbor and the owner of the next-door Fantasy Hall Exchange, Huanmeng. Hello, Brother Fantasy. Conan seemed to be a very polite child. Fantasy looked at Conan with an inexplicable smile on his lips. When he saw Conan greeting him, he nodded and casually took out a candy and handed it to Conan. Well behaved, please have some candy. Thank you. Conan is still very polite, but of course, only he knows if there is any slander in his heart. This is not the first time that Huanmeng has come here to eat, but he occasionally pays some food expenses, so Mari Zayagoro can tolerate him for so long. In fact, it's just that Huanmeng is too lazy to cook it himself, and Xiaolan's craftsmanship is also very good, so let's just come and eat. After breakfast, Fantasy returned to her own exchange and went online to publish some exchange information, which could attract some customers. However, this was also the first time that Fantasy had done this. It used to be okay, but now, it needs more attention. Otherwise, it would be better to close the exchange. I don't know if the information posted on the internet worked, but at noon, a woman came to the exchange. This is the first time a business has come to visit, and it is worth commemorating. I poured a cup of tea for the guest, and Fantasy sat at the office desk, looking at the guest with a somewhat inexplicable smile on her face. Welcome to the Fantasy Hall Exchange, what do you want to exchange for yourself? My name is Yuko Chizuwa, and I am an idol star. The woman said, sighing somewhat helplessly. A unpopular and unremarkable idol star. Oh. Fantasy nodded, her head spinning rapidly, and she suddenly understood. So, do you want to become famous? Do you want to become a popular idol? Yes. In that case, what needs to be exchanged is name. As for celebrities, it's not too difficult. Are you a singer or a movie star? A singer. Sorry, then all you need is 1 or 2 songs that can bring you huge fame. That's not a problem. So, what can you exchange for? Fantasy continued with a smile on her face and reminded her directly, just declare in advance that if the exchange doesn't satisfy me, the exchange agreement cannot be established. Although it is an equivalent exchange, whether it is equivalent or not is just a dream. It is the final say. Here, he is the master. What he says is what he says. If he is not satisfied, the exchange cannot be carried out naturally. I can give you money. Money is the most worthless thing with me, so I'm sorry, the exchange agreement cannot be established in this way. So. Yoshiko Chizuwa thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying directly, I'll exchange Yoko Okano's body with you. Oh. It's interesting. The smile on Dream's face became inexplicable again. Are you exchanging someone else's body? Can you still make decisions for others? There will always be a way. Is that right? That's great. Fantasy nodded. So, the exchange agreement is officially established. She took out a piece of paper from the drawer and handed it to Yuko Ikazawa. This is a pretty good song. Although it won't make you gain huge popularity all at once, it will also be of great help to you now. After you hand over Yoko Okano's body to me, I will fulfill the subsequent exchange matters, with a time limit of 1 month. If you can't complete the exchange project, the consequences will be very serious. Moreover, the exchange project cannot be disclosed to third parties, otherwise I have the right to terminate the exchange. Before that, you are me. The client, what can I do for you to call me? Understood. Understood, you wait for my message. Yoko Chizawa nodded, took the sheet music, and left. After all, it wasn't selling herself out, so she wouldn't have any hesitation. As for what Yoko Okano would do, she didn't want to think too much. Standing by the window, watching Yuko Chizawa's receding figure, Fantasy's face still wore a smile. Human psychology is indeed the most complex and terrifying. In order to make oneself famous, one chooses to betray others. However, that's why the exchange has the meaning of existence. Everyone takes what they need. Humph. 2 days passed like this, and there wasn't much business coming in during this time. However, on that night, Fantasy saw someone from the neighboring Maori detective agency go up again. It seems that the detective agency's business is indeed better than the exchange. Not long after, the Muri family went out, and Fantasy still sat in the office biting on the apple. Although she liked to drink juice, it was too troublesome to squeeze the juice first, so it was better to just bite on the apple. Time slowly passed, and I don't know how long it was before Fantasy's phone rang. I casually pressed the hands.free button to connect, and inside came the voice of Yuko Chizawa. There has been a murder case at Yoko Okano's house, and I am now in trouble because I have been to her house, so the police suspect me of being the culprit. Can you solve this problem? No problem, you are my client. During the agreement period, I have an obligation to help you clean up some trouble. Please wait a little longer. Hanging up the phone, picking up an apple again and taking a bite, then Fantasy left the house and took a taxi directly towards Yoko Chonya's home. There was no need to ask anyone about the address, and Fantasy could solve it on its own. Otherwise, why open an exchange? Not long after, Fantasy arrived at the lower floor of Yoko Okano's apartment, looked up, chuckled lightly, and walked straight up. Soon, they arrived at Yoko Okano's home floor, where the vigilant police wanted to stop Fantasy. However, when Fantasy's demonic voice sounded, they stopped doing anything unnecessary. There are many people in the room, including the police, the Muri family, Yoko Okano and her agent, 3 children, and Yuko Ikazawa. Seeing a dream come in, the leading police officer couldn't help but frown. Suddenly, an ordinary person ran into the scene of the murder case. What's going on? Who are you? I am Fantasy from the Fantasy Exchange, and Miss Yuko Chizawa is my client. I heard that she had an accident, so I naturally want to come and take a look. Fantasy smiled and nodded at everyone. Seeing Fantasy, Yuko Chi also breathed a sigh of relief. Although she had entered the exchange purely because she was attracted by the name and had a mentality of being a dead horse and a living horse doctor, a song that Fantasy casually brought out to her made her more convinced. Now, of course, she hopes that Fantasy can help her solve the problem. The matter is actually quite simple. Someone has died here, it seems to be homicide, so Yuko Chizawa, who has been here before, has also become one of the suspects. Therefore, to solve this matter, all you need to do is prove that Yuko Chizawa is innocent. To prove that Yuko Chizawa is innocent, you just need to find the culprit. After listening to these things, Fantasy nodded to understand. She ran to the place where the refrigerator was located and poured herself a glass of juice. She held the juice and wandered around the place where the body was located, carefully looking at it. Then, while drinking the juice, she pondered. As the police department was about to say something, Fantasy curved her lips and smiled. Sorry, I understand now. Nanny. Upon hearing this, the police department raised an eyebrow and asked urgently, what do you understand? This is not a murder case at all, but a suicide case. Suicide. How could it be? Although it's hard to believe, this is the truth. Fantasy drank half of the juice in one gulp, smacked her mouth, and handed the cup to a little girl next to her. Help me hold it, of course you can also help me drink it. Hi, the little girl responded and carefully took the cup, then blinked her big eyes and looked at the dream. Fantasy smiled at her and then squatted down at the location of the body, pointing to some traces on the nearby floor and saying, well, although it's not very obvious anymore, this is definitely a sign that the water stains have dried up, and then this. Take the murder weapon over and see if the handle of the knife matches the kiss of this small hole, said Dream as she pointed her finger towards a small hole on one side and then snapped her finger at a police officer on the other side. The police officer who heard Dream's words looked at the ice-screen police department. The ice-screen police department nodded, and then the police officer directly brought the murder weapon over and played with it. The handle of the knife happened to be embedded in the concave hole, standing there with the tip facing upwards. Dream snapped his finger again and said, wow, that's it. Just add ice to fix it, and... As he spoke, he pointed to a stool on one side and said, then stand on it and fall with your back to the ground, and you can go to hell. This is a great method, everyone can try it. If it doesn't work, you don't need to pay. Even so, it can't be concluded that he committed suicide, can it? Officer Moo still had doubts. Fantasy once again snapped his fingers and smiled. This is also very simple. Many people have the habit of writing diaries, especially those who are heartbroken and cannot confide in others. They will want to write something, which can be considered a kind of confession. Searching for similar things in the deceased's home should be able to find them, and the most crucial point is the motive. Leaving aside others, Miss Chizayuzi has no motive to kill the deceased, and even before that, she didn't know him, right? Yuko Chizawa nodded in agreement. At this moment, the police officers who went to search the deceased's house also brought back their diary. The police department looked through it and found that those who could do it were not fools. After careful consideration, the conclusion of this case came out. There were no murderers, and if there were any, it was the deceased himself. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 3. Trading with Quantum, Being My Maid. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So, the matter is resolved. Fantasy snapped her fingers again and then looked at the little girl next to her who was holding the cup for her. She mainly looked at the cup, but found that a small half of the juice that was supposed to be left had already been consumed. This made Fantasy a little stunned. The little girl actually helped her drink the juice. At this moment, the little girl looked at the illusion with a look of admiration on her face, and said excitedly, "Big brother, you are really amazing. You solved the case so quickly. Are you a detective?" The so-called detective is just a clown-like existence who recklessly peeks into the privacy of others under the guise of seeking the truth. "Big brother, I am not a detective." Huanming smiled and blinked at the little girl, then took out his business card and handed it to her. "Big brother, I run an exchange. If you have anything you want, you can come and exchange it with me. As long as it is something I can do, no matter what it is, there is no problem. In business, the important thing is promotion. As long as the promotion is in place, the business will come. These little girls and children are undoubtedly potential customers, and even if they are not, they can help promote for free. As long as they discuss more people will know. Among those who know, there will always be people who want something but cannot get it. Maybe they will come to the exchange with a try-and-see attitude, and then business will come to them." The little girl took the business card and put it away, then looked at Huanmeng and asked, "Big brother, is your name called Huanmeng?" "Well, isn't that a great name? If you really want to say something, it's a bit strange," the little girl said, revealing a very sweet smile. "Big brother, my name is Bumei, you must remember." "Okay, I remember." Fantasy nodded and smiled, reaching out to touch the little girl's head. Then, she took a bite from an apple in the fridge and waved her hand as she walked outside. "I'm leaving now, everyone. Goodbye. Time will never stop flowing just because of someone or something." Soon, a week has passed and the exchange with Yuko Ikazawa is still ongoing. Currently, there is no news from Yuko Ikazawa, but Fantasy is not in a hurry. He is not afraid that Yuko Ikazawa will not complete the exchange project. If that's the case, Yuko Ikazawa will definitely regret it. Trading with Fantasy is no different from trading with demons, and the outcome may even be even more tragic than that. There hasn't been much business coming to them during this period, but two little girls have come to look for Huanmeng. One is Jingzi, and the other is the one named Bume. The two little girls seem to like Huanmeng's friendly big brother, but they don't know that he is a beast disguised in human skin, a demon hidden in the light. Although Fantasy didn't do anything to the two little girls, for Jingzi, Fantasy tasted the little girl's fragrant lips and tongue more than once. After finishing, she still sighed and said, "The taste of the little girl is really good." That night, Fantasy was still sitting in the office biting an apple when suddenly the doorbell rang. Hearing this, Fantasy couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. It seemed like there was business again. The girl who came in was wearing a school uniform. In fact, when the girl came in, she found that she seemed to have walked in the wrong place. But when she thought about it, she had already arrived, so she couldn't just leave like this. So she had to grit her head and sit down. Anyway, let's take a look first before we talk. Welcome to the Dream Hall Exchange. What do you want to exchange for yourself? Please declare in advance that you can come to me to exchange money, but you cannot use money to trade with me. Transaction. Sorry, whether it's money or fame, social status or anything else, as long as you can speak up, you can trade. Of course, if you trade, you also have to pay a certain amount of money, otherwise the trade agreement cannot be established. Is everything okay? Of course. Can I ask you to help me find someone? The girl looked at Huanmeng with anticipation in her eyes. Huanmeng nodded, indicating that there was no problem at all. Who are you looking for? Kudo Shinichi. Kudo Shinichi. There's no problem with this, but due to some special reasons, the cost you need to pay is also huge. Do you have any cases of seeking him? If that's the case, just contact me directly. I don't recommend you seeking him. Can you help me rescue a child? He has been kidnapped. The girl said anxiously, nodding her head in response. Kidnapping, which means there is a high possibility of life-threatening situations. It's a matter of human life, so the price you have to pay must be high. What do you want to offer in exchange? I was originally planning to give him money, but when I realized that Dream had said he couldn't exchange money with him, the girl changed her mind and said, "What do you want from me?" Oh, that's a problem. Fantasy touched her chin, but still couldn't touch her beard, so she felt relieved. The other person's life is in danger, which means I'm also saving someone's life. The kindness of saving lives cannot be repaid. Speaking of which, the illusion carefully scrutinized the girl. The lighting was a bit dim and I couldn't see clearly, but now upon closer inspection, she was still very beautiful. In that case, you can come and serve me as a maid for 3 months. What do you think? Girl. Maid. The girl's expression was somewhat surprised, and she didn't expect it to be like this, while Fantasy nodded confidently. Yes, maid, in 3 months, you will be completely mine. Except for not having to serve me in bed, everything else will have to be done. However, after 3 months, the price is already very low. If you don't want to, you can only ask the detective and the police for help. However, as a friendly reminder, they may not be able to help you find someone, and even if they do, they may not guarantee the safety of the person you are looking for. Well, the girl became conflicted, but it didn't last long before quickly gritting her teeth and agreeing, "Sure, as long as you can find the person completely, I'll be your maid for 3 months. Great, then, the exchange agreement is established. Regarding the exchange project, you cannot disclose it to any third party. If I find someone and you don't fulfill the exchange project, you will also be very miserable." Fantasy smiled inexplicably at the corner of her mouth. So, do you have anything that the person you are looking for has used? This. I don't have it on me, but I can go home and get it. What do you want this for? The girl was very strange. If you want to find someone, shouldn't you ask them for their age, name, or something like that? Although the girl was puzzled, Fantasy was too lazy to explain to her and directly asked, speaking of which, what is your name? Just call me Quantum. Quantum, it's great, it's a great name, much better than mine, he said in praise. Fantasy picked up an apple and stood up, taking a bite of it and saying, so, let's go. Oh. Quantum nodded and then followed Dream out to retrieve the things used by the person she was looking for. That so-called home is actually not very far away, it only takes about 10 minutes by car to get there. Outside the house, Fantasy found traces of the door lock being pried open, but he was too lazy to say much. His task was just to find someone, and what happened to someone else's house had little to do with him. Entering the room, Quantum took out the clothes worn by the person he was looking for, which seemed to be a little boy. He had no interest in this illusion and was too lazy to think much. Instead, he took out a light blue semi-transparent piece of paper or something from his body, quickly folding it into a paper crane. Then something that shocked the Quantum happened. The paper crane seemed to have come to life, spinning around the little boy's clothes before flying towards the outside. Fantasy glanced at the flying paper crane, then turned around and walked out of the room. Let's go, it will take us to find the person you are looking for. Once again, I declare that we cannot disclose any information about the exchange project or anything that happens during the exchange process to any third person. Hi. Quantum responded and quickly left with the illusion. The flight speed of the paper crane was not much, and Fantasy and Quantum slowly followed suit. The location of the kidnapper seemed not too far, and after walking for a short time, they entered an apartment building. Seeing this building, Quantum seemed to have thought of something, but did not speak. The two of them followed the paper crane upstairs and came to the outside of a house. Seeing the house, Quantum seemed to have confirmed it, but it seemed a bit unbelievable, so they rang the doorbell directly. Who is it? I am Quantum. Miss Quantum, what's up? I'm not available right now. Anyway, please open the door first. Quantum quickly spoke, while the illusion on one side had already transformed the paper crane back into a piece of paper, put it away, and without saying anything, kicked it directly towards the door. Bang! Ah! The door was kicked open and seemed to have bumped into someone, causing a scream. However, Fantasy was too lazy to pay attention and walked in. After a while, he found the little boy playing games in the room. Without saying anything to the little boy, he turned his head and looked at the Quantum that followed him, showing a smile. So, I have found the person for you, and it's in good condition. I won't worry about anything else. The person outside will make him unconscious for a while. You should call the police or do whatever you want. Just don't forget the exchange project. I'll be waiting for you at home tomorrow. After Dream finished speaking, he left directly and casually put the kidnapper into a coma, ensuring that Quantum and the little boy would not be in any danger. Even if this exchange was completed, he wobbled around and brought back a little maid, which seemed quite nice. However, the maid who doesn't need to sleep seems to be of little use. At most, she can help with household chores such as serving tea, pouring water, doing laundry, and folding blankets, which seems to be a bit of a loss. Forget it, let's talk about it later. Shaking his head, he took out an apple from somewhere and walked towards his home while biting it. The reputation of the exchange was still not enough, and there was not much business. It seemed that he needed to do more business to establish his reputation. Otherwise, business would still be booming and he wouldn't be able to get anything useful in exchange. Well, besides taking on a few more business deals to increase awareness, there is also a need for promotion. The current level of promotion is almost non-existent, so more promotion is needed. Computers have not yet become widespread, and even mobile phones have not been widely used. Therefore, attention should be paid to dissemination methods such as television and newspapers. Sorry, just do more advertising. Television is not very feasible, but newspapers can still do it. If the exchange information appears in the newspaper for a month in a row, there will definitely be many people paying attention, and then there should be many people coming over. With more business, there will be more things exchanged. There are many things that one needs, such as bed warmers, rare treasures, and other things. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 4. The confused Yoko, starting from now. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next morning around 9 o'clock when I helped Quantum find the little boy, Quantum arrived at the exchange. Because Fantasy called her early in the morning and told her that she didn't need to go to school for the next 3 months, and the suspension procedures have been completed. She just came over to fulfill her duties as a maid. Quantum called the school and asked, and it turned out to be like this, so there was nothing more to say. They packed up some clothes for washing, brought what they needed, and went straight to the exchange. Well, with your looks, as a maid, I'm not afraid of losing face. I just don't know how skilled you are at cooking. First, squeeze me a cup of fresh juice, just apple juice. Hi. Although I really want to roast about the connection between squeezing juice and cooking, as a maid, I don't need to ask so many questions. I can just do what I'm told. Quantum also knows it very well, so he went to the kitchen to do his work directly. His dream is to sit there, bite an apple and read a newspaper. At this time, a new small page has been opened in the bottom right corner of the homepage of the newspaper, publishing information about the exchange. This was the one that Fantasy called for help overnight last night. It is estimated that more than half of the newspapers will help, lasting for about a month, which is enough for many people to understand. Of course, it is not certain how many people can come. Fantasy Dream Hall Trading Office, whether it's money, fame and fortune, social status or anything else, can exchange valuable things other than money, phone. Address. Upon seeing this information, Fantasy nodded in satisfaction. At this moment, Quantum also came out with a glass of apple juice. Fantasy picked up the glass and took a sip, closed his eyes, and savored it. Then, he opened his eyes and nodded. Well, that's pretty good. In this case, you're also a qualified maid in the kitchen. So, let's replace this maid outfit, said Fantasy. She also took out 2 sets of maid outfits from somewhere and handed them to Quantum. From now on, within these 3 months, this is your attire. You can't change it without permission, understand? Hi. Quantum responded, took the maid costume and wanted to change clothes. Anyway, she agreed. After 3 months of maid time, changing into the maid costume didn't matter, and seeing that Fantasy seemed to have some magical ability, she didn't dare to resist. However, seeing that she wanted to change clothes, Fantasy frowned and immediately spoke up, "Stop, just change here." With a snap of her finger, the window curtains were pulled up, not afraid of being seen by outsiders. However, upon hearing his words, Quantum was still a bit shocked. If she changed here, wouldn't Fantasy have seen them all? Although there will still be underwear, why, you don't want to. Fantasy looked at the hesitant Quantum with a slightly dangerous smile on its lips. Although I don't let you sleep, there are still some things that need to be done by you. During the agreement period, you belong to me. Whatever I ask you to do, you can do for me. You need to understand a problem. Signing an exchange agreement with me is similar to signing an agreement with a demon, but if you don't follow the agreement, the end will definitely be even more tragic than signing an agreement with a demon. Do you want to give it a try? No, I'll change. Quantum shook his head, feeling very aggrieved, but in the end, he didn't dare to resist the illusion. He bit his lips and tried hard not to let the tears in his eyes stay. His hands trembled a bit as he began to take off his school uniform and let a man see his body. This was the first time, and there was a sense of shame in being forced. Fantasy stared coldly at the movements of the quantum. He didn't think he was a good person, so he didn't have the slightest unwillingness to do such things. Devils can do anything, he's just a child. Quantum's beauty is indeed very good. Although not very tall, her figure is very standard, her appearance is also very beautiful, her skin is pure white and delicate, and she is a youthful and beautiful girl. Perhaps due to nervousness, the speed of changing clothes slowed down a lot, and the unintentional walking made the illusion more eye-catching, even making him feel a bit thirsty. He grabbed a cup filled with apple juice and drank all the apple juice in one gulp, feeling much better. Despite stumbling, Quantum still changed into a maid costume and stood in front of the phantom, with tears in his eyes and a pitiful expression. Coupled with this outfit, it really made people feel the urge to bully her. Fortunately, Phantom's self-control was quite good, and he didn't continue to do anything more, just nodded. Great, then, clean up the office and prepare lunch. Yes. Quantum responded, found the cleaning tool, and started cleaning. Fantasy still sat there reading the newspaper. What a leisurely morning. The fact has proven that the business of the exchange is really not doing well, even the third-rate gross profit detective agency next door cannot match it, even if it is advertising, so there is nothing to do all day. In his idle boredom, Fantasy began to train his little maid, such as asking her to help him with some small tasks such as pounding his back and pinching his legs. Slowly, one day Quantum would become a satisfactory maid for him. Although he only said that he would let her be a maid for 3 months, 3 months would be enough to do many things. However, in the afternoon, Fantasy received a phone call from Yuko Chizawa, who said she was ready and asked her to go to the hotel tonight. Yoko Ono would be waiting for him in the room. Of course, Yoko Okano would not really wait for Fantasy Dream, so it was definitely not voluntary. However, what method did Yuko Ikazawa use? Fantasy Dream was too lazy to think too much. This was just an exchange. No matter what method the client used to complete the exchange project, it was not something that Fantasy Dream should care about. As long as the exchange can be completed, it is enough. After answering the phone, Fantasy sat in a chair drinking Quantum freshly squeezed juice, silent for a long time, and then showed an inexplicable smile. Everyone has what they want. To put it better, it's an ideal, but to put it harder, it's a desire. It's a manifestation of selfishness. In order to achieve one's goals, sometimes even oneself can be betrayed, let alone others. That's why exchanges have meaning. But I like this kind of exchange. He. The Quantum next to her felt a chill all over her body as she heard the dangerous laughter of the dream. At this moment, she realized that she seemed to have entered a wolf's den, and maybe she would be bitten to the point where there were no bones left. However, despite realizing this, Quantum can only accept its own fate. Running away is not possible. Let's not say whether she dares or not, even if she runs, she probably won't be able to run. Fantasy is not an ordinary person, and now we can only pray that we can safely spend these 3 months of maid life. We hope to be able to leave with our whole body when the time comes. Fantasy seemed to sense the thoughts of the little maid, glanced at her, and an inexplicable smile curled up at the corner of her mouth. How many people could make a deal with the devil and finally retreat completely? At 9 o'clock in the evening, at the agreed time, Fantasy appeared in the hotel on time. In the lobby, she exchanged the keys to the room with Yuko Ikazawa using the scores of 2 songs. The exchange was considered over. Welcome to come again next time. Fantasy gave Yuko Ikazawa a flying kiss, with an inexplicable smile on her lips. She turned around and walked towards the elevator. Looking at Fantasy's back, Yuko Ikazawa sighed helplessly. Although she had sold Yoko Okano like this, everyone would die for themselves. Seemingly convincing herself, Yuko Chizawa looked at the scores of the 2 songs in her hand and turned around to leave. She just wanted to fulfill her dream and become a highly anticipated superstar like Yoko Okano. In room 5207, Fantasy used a key to open the door and walked in. She closed the door and walked into the room. At a glance, she saw Yoko Okano lying in bed, seemingly asleep, but her face turned red and her body twisted restlessly. Judging from the situation, it goes without saying that it must have been drugged. Is this the so-called Fan X? It seems pretty good. Huanmeng touched her chin with a smile on her face, but she didn't have any reluctance or anything. Yoko Ono was just an item that someone had exchanged with her. Sorry, it's an item. In the eyes of Fantasy, the person being exchanged is not much different from the item. Now, she belongs to herself. I walked over to the bedside and sat down, leaning down with my hands on the bed to approach Yoko Okano. I closed my eyes, wrinkled my nose, and took a few breaths. Then I opened my eyes in disbelief. The fragrance of a virgin, such a big star, and someone who has had a boyfriend before, is still a virgin. It's unbelievable. Can there still be such a person in Japan? Humph. Realizing that the other party was still an unconscious virgin, Fantasy seemed even more excited and lowered her head to kiss. Yoko Okano, who had been drugged, was completely unaware of the current situation and instead responded with some cooperation. Perhaps now, she has lost her way. After finishing a kiss, Fantasy let out a light breath and then grinned, without showing any mercy, forcefully tearing apart the troublesome clothes on Yoko Okano's body. But just looking at Yoko Okano like this, I always feel like something is missing. After touching my chin and pondering for a moment, the dream finally understood and said, "Wow, this is not much different from a puppet, it's not fun at all." As she spoke, she snapped her fingers and suddenly woke up from her sleep. Yoko Okano suddenly opened her eyes and saw a dream of sitting by the bed without clothes on. She also found herself lying in bed without clothes on. She immediately reacted and sat up from the bed, pulling over the blanket to cover her body, her expression filled with panic. "Who are you? What do you want to do? Get out of here. Get out of here. Excuse me, is that what makes it interesting?" Fantasy smiled again, snapped her fingers again, and the blanket was pulled open by an invisible force, exposing Yoko Okano's body once again. "Let me introduce myself, under Fantasy, you have been exchanged for me. From now on, you are my person. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 5. Yoko Okano's Struggle and Qiben Autumn. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. What are you talking nonsense about? Get out of here. Help me. Help me. Help me. Help me. Yoko Okano shouted loudly for help, but Fantasy just smiled on her forehead. Humph, the sound insulation in this room is very good. No matter how loudly you shout, no one will hear you. I don't have so much time to play this game with you, let alone anyone to save the beauty from heroes. So, you should leave some energy to struggle, that's more fun, isn't it? You. You're not a person. You bastard. Sorry, you're right. I'm not a human, I came into this world as a demon. After Fantasy finished speaking, she rushed towards Yoko Okano and pinned her down on the bed. Yoko Okano struggled hard, and the current situation made her very frightened. She didn't know what had happened, but Yuko Qizawa suddenly invited her out for dinner, saying it was something very important. After much thought, she finally made the decision. During the meal, Yuko Qizawa repeatedly apologized to her. She thought it was because of something a few days ago, so she said it was okay, so she continued to eat and chat, and then there was no memory of what happened next until I suddenly woke up to find a young man appearing in front of me and doing that kind of thing to me. This young man Yoko Okano suddenly remembered that when his ex-boyfriend died in his room a few days ago, this young man seemed to have appeared and said something about the exchange. Yoko Ikazawa was his client. Sorry, everything seems to be clear now. It's probably that Yuko Chizawa used himself to exchange something with this young man. He was sold by someone, and was sold by Yuko Chizawa. It seems like you understand something. Fantasy's right hand pinched Yoko Okano's chin and said rudely, "You're just being exchanged with me for what she wants, just a few songs. It seems like you're only worth this price, but it doesn't matter. Just remember, from now on, you belong to me completely." Done. In Yoko Okano's conscious mind, there was only one thought left. Last night in the latter half of the night, it seemed to rain, making the morning temperature a bit cool. However, the illusion of sleeping all night felt refreshed. After taking a shower and changing clothes, I turned my gaze to Yoko Okano lying in bed with lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. A smile curved from the corner of my mouth, which felt really good. Sitting down by the bed, she bent down and looked at Yoko Okano. However, Yoko Okano still had no reaction. Seeing this, Fantasy kissed her again. At this moment, Yoko Okano finally recovered from her trance and quickly struggled. "You bastard. Let go of me." Fantasy naturally wouldn't let go of her just because of a few words, but just kissed her until she was a bit breathless before letting go. "Look at your body, but it has become even more beautiful and even younger. This is the reward for doing things with demons. You will continue to be so young in the future, but the cost is that you will only belong to me." As she spoke, she took out a necklace from somewhere. There was a flame-shaped ruby on the necklace, and she put it directly on Yoko Okano's neck. Fantasy gently caressed her face and continued, "From now on, you can't let anyone enjoy your body. Otherwise, the flames from hell sealed in the necklace will burn people to the point of leaving no residue. If you don't believe me, you can give it a try. If someone dies because of you, I think it must be a good feeling. Also, this is my phone number code. Since you are all my people, there is no trouble that cannot be solved. You can call me and I will clean up all the trouble." After finishing speaking, he stuffed a business card into Yoko Okano's hand, took out a set of women's clothes and set them aside, and then left. When he arrived at the door, he suddenly thought of something and turned back with a smile, saying, "By the way, don't think about running away. Even if you hide at the end of the world, even if you hide in hell, I can find you back. At that time, you will face an even more tragic life." After speaking this time, I just really left, leaving Yoko Okano here alone. For a long time, Yoko Okano seemed to have finally recovered. Looking at the business card in her hand, she was very angry and wanted to tear it off, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't tear it off. She wanted to take off the necklace around her neck, but found that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't do it. In the end, she had to give up in despair. But the next second, she suddenly became frightened again. Is that young man really a demon? Why do business cards and necklaces look like this? Can't I really escape? Around 9 o'clock in the morning, Fantasy returned to the exchange. As soon as he entered, Quantum, who was cleaning up, quickly bowed and said, "Young master." "Young master." Fantasy tilted her head to look at Quantum, slightly conflicted, and casually spoke up, "Young master, although it sounds good, you should call me master." "Ah. But." Quantum seemed a bit reluctant. Master and young master, this was not just a title, but looking at the dangerous smile on Dream's face, Quantum dared not object. He gritted his teeth and finally spoke softly, "Master." Master. A title that seemed to have exhausted the power of Quantum, while Fantasy smiled and nodded in satisfaction. She walked up to Quantum and hooked her chin, asking her to lift her head. "Well done, I'll reward you." She kissed directly, and the first kiss was taken away. Quantum was stunned for a moment, then quickly struggled and took a few steps back, blushing with a shy and anxious expression. "You. Didn't you say?" "I just said I don't need to sleep, but I didn't say I don't need to do anything else. Kissing is not sleeping. Fantasy smiled, but Quantum's heart sank to the bottom. Sure enough, he had entered the wolf's den. She walked directly to her desk and sat down, instructing Quantum to squeeze juice for herself. At this point, Quantum really didn't have the courage to resist, or knew that resistance was useless, so she gave up and bit her lip to squeeze juice. Fantasy was looking at the newspaper. Early in the morning, it was written that a detective named Mori Kagoro had solved a series of murder cases on Moon Shadow Island, including a murder case from 12 years ago. Well, Moon Shadow Island, isn't that the murder case where the fake mother avenged her father? I can't believe this incident has already passed. Give me another glass, he said, smacking his mouth and drinking all the juice Quantum had brought in one gulp. Hi. Quantum responded with a sound and continued to pour juice. Fantasy continued to flip through the newspaper, and time slowly passed in this situation. The day quickly passed. The next day, standing by the window and watching the hallucinations outside, I suddenly realized that a girl dressed in a slightly rustic yet innocent way had entered the detective office next door. After feeling my chin and pondering for a long time, I suddenly remembered again. If I guess correctly, this should be the called Hirata Yame. However, it seems that there is no need to intervene in this matter. I am not familiar with her, and if I really want to say something, I haven't come to find myself, so I can't intervene. So time slowly passed by again, and in the afternoon, a woman came knocking on her door, representing business. This is something that Fantasy would love to see, especially female customers. Most of the things related to women are very interesting, isn't it? Welcome to the Fantasy Hall Exchange. Fantasy looked at the woman sitting in front of her with a smile on her face, while Quantum next to her looked at the woman with some pity. This is the place where demons are located, and coming here will definitely result in great losses. What do you want to exchange for yourself in terms of fame, wealth, honor, social status, and even someone else's life? Please declare in advance that you can exchange money with me, but you cannot use money to trade with me. Is it really possible to trade anything? Of course, as long as you can say it, as long as I can do it, anything can be done. So I want to inherit the inheritance, can I? The woman asked, and when she heard this, a smile curved her lips. Of course, as long as you want. Great, let me introduce myself first. My name is Kiyomoto Akihiro. The woman began her self-introduction. I have a group at home, and currently the person in charge of the group is my grandfather. But I know that my grandfather plans to hand over the group to my sister for inheritance, and I can only get a pitiable little bit of property, which is absolutely unacceptable. So, I want to inherit the entire group. Is Qiben group a good group? It's not a problem if you want to inherit the inheritance. Huanmeng nodded and then showed an inexplicable smile. So, what do you use to trade? It's not good if the value is too low. This. Qiben Qiujiang pondered for a moment. Previously, coming here was purely a desperate illness and seeking medical treatment. He had never thought about what to trade, but upon reflection, if he could inherit the inheritance, as long as he did not sacrifice his own interests, it seemed that it would be worthwhile to trade anything. After pondering for a long time and with inexplicable hatred, Qiben Qiujiang finally made up his mind. So, how about exchanging with my sister? Although she is getting married soon, I can guarantee that she is still a virgin. Besides, a few years ago, I accidentally obtained 3 gemstones in the shape of Taiyang, moon, and star. Although I don't know their origins, it can be said that their value is very good and they can all be given to you. What are the exchange terms? Another person who can betray others for their own sake, and even betray their own sister. They say that the most ruthless imperial family, even these wealthy families, is it the same? Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 6. Gambling with Matsumoto Kobayashi, poisoned. You are listening at novel full.audio. But anyway, everything has little to do with the illusion. As long as the other party can provide the traded items and satisfy themselves, the transaction agreement can be reached. There's no problem at all. As long as you can hand over the transaction to me, everything else doesn't matter. So, the transaction agreement is established. As for the transaction project, you cannot disclose it to others. The agreement time is 1 month, and I will complete the transaction project within 1 month. I hope you can also complete it. If you don't fulfill the transaction conditions, you will be very miserable, understand? I understand. Kiyomoto Akira nodded, but after some thought, she still spoke up, but my sister's wedding ceremony will be in a few days. I hope it can be completed at that time, otherwise I can't guarantee that I will still be a virgin when I give my sister to you. There's no problem with this. I'll talk to your grandfather then. It would be even better if you could provide this opportunity and save me trouble. Sure, you will attend the wedding as my friend and then find another opportunity. I hope you can really do it. Of course, if you can't do it, you don't need to put in any effort. So, the cooperation is enjoyable. Fantasy reached out and shook hands with Qiben Qiujiang. Qiben Qiujiang nodded but didn't say much, so he left directly. Fantasy stood by the window, looking at the figure of Kiyomoto Akira leaving below. Quantum, who seemed to be incredulous about the trading project, stood beside him, looking at Kiyomoto Akira's figure with a surprised expression. At this moment, Fantasy curled her lips and smiled. Although I have always called myself a demon, sometimes these people are even more like demons than me. For their own purposes, they can easily betray others, their friends, and even their loved ones without hesitation. Compared to me, I am still too pure. This world is indeed a hellish world. Upon hearing Phantom say so, Quantum could only remain silent. It was unimaginable that someone would use their sister as an item to trade what they needed with others. Compared to Phantom, this behavior seemed more like a demon, and the human heart could be so dark that it was a bit unbelievable. Fantasy glanced at Quantum. The girl was a bit innocent, but it didn't matter. Here, she would see more darkness. The human heart is the most complex thing in the world, get used to it as soon as possible. In the future, you will see more ridiculous things, cut. I sneered and didn't say much. I sat down to read the newspaper and instructed Quantum to pour me a cup of freshly squeezed juice. I also had to prepare dinner. With an extra maid, it seemed like there was no need to go to the next room to eat and drink. 2 more days passed like this, and during these 2 days, Quantum had been trained to kiss without any resistance. Instead, he had a slight understanding of cooperation, which made Fantasy very satisfied. However, he didn't say much. Success in training was not surprising, and failure in training was called an accident. Although there was no further action, for Fantasy, the woman he liked couldn't escape. In the past 2 days, I also received a wedding invitation from Qiben Qiujiang. As Qiben Qiujiang's friend, I will attend the wedding on a small island, and we will take a cruise ship back together. At that time, it will be the action time chosen by Fantasy, and he will know what will happen on that cruise ship. Qiben Qiujiang's younger sister, as Huanman also knows, is a girl named Qiben Xiajiang. Overall, she is a very good girl, pure and kind, which is unbearable to hurt. Of course, this person does not include Huanman. He considers himself a demon, not a human. Perhaps everyone has a demon in their heart, the only difference is that some people lock the demon tightly, while others release it. That's why there is a difference between good and bad people in this world. Of course, Fantasy considers itself not a good person, but it is also very different from bad people. However, if one really wants to say something, it can only be seen from different perspectives. Before attending the wedding of the Qiben family, Fantasy had no job and didn't get involved in so many things. Being in this world and participating in various cases seemed to be a fun thing, but Fantasy didn't have much interest in such things. Whoever wanted to kill someone had nothing to do with him. The truth was even more irrelevant to a demon. The only thing that made Fantasy interested was doing business with people. Only by getting used to the darkness of human hearts can he maintain a transcendent state of mind, like a god above, coldly observing everything in the world. However, before she could attend the wedding of the Qiben family, Fantasy took her little maid Quantum to attend the Matsumoto family's wedding. Matsumoto, the chief police officer of the police station, and his daughter got married, so she invited Fantasy. However, Fantasy was not related to Matsumoto, the chief police officer, but to Matsumoto, the little lily. Fantasy had studied for several years, and at that time, Matsumoto, the little lily, was the teacher of Fantasy. At that time, there were still many classmates in Fantasy, and a few of them could be considered acquaintances, such as Xiaolan, Suzuki Yuenzi, the second daughter of the Suzuki family, and Shinichi Kudo. However, apart from Xiaolan, they were not very familiar with anyone else, only acquaintances. After high school, Fantasy did not continue studying, and now it is estimated that all of her former classmates have forgotten about her. It's really fortunate that this teacher can still remember her. Attending the wedding with Quantum dressed as a maid, it seemed a bit independent and attracted the attention of many people. However, although Huanmeng maintained a smile, he also felt a bit distant and didn't say much to those people. Only the Mu police officer came over to chat with Huanmeng for a few words. That night, Huanmeng solved the case with a few strokes, which left a deep impression on the Mu police officer. Then, Fantasy walked into the bride's dressing room and saw the bride, Matsumoto Yuriko, who had changed into a formal dress. It must be said that Matsumoto Yuriko, who had put on a pure white wedding dress, was really beautiful and moving. There was not much person in the room either. Fantasy added Quantum and Matsumoto Lily. Fantasy touched her chin and, tsk her mouth, circling around Matsumoto Lily a few times before shaking her head. Unfortunately, such a beautiful and charming little lily was not meant for me to wear a wedding dress. Didn't you say that when I grew up, I would wear a wedding dress for myself? Why did you wear a wedding dress for someone else now? That's what you lied to the teacher about, and besides, the person I wore a wedding dress for is my first love. Matsumoto Kobayashi's smile did not make her unhappy with the words of the phantom. It was mainly because she had become accustomed to the teasing of the phantom. When Phantom was still her student, she often teased her, which was different from a person who often made her angry, Shinichi Kudo. Phantom could often make her happy. First love lover. However, Fantasy, who heard Matsumoto Yurika's words, raised an eyebrow and immediately leaned in front of Matsumoto Yurika. She gently brushed her bangs with her right hand and whispered in her ear, "So, why don't we make a bet?" "What?" Yurika Matsumoto looked curious and eager to try, while Fantasy triggered a slightly dangerous smile. The Quantum next to her couldn't help but feel sorry for Yurika Matsumoto. It seemed that this bride had no intention of marrying her first love. Fantasy didn't pay attention to the Quantum on one side and whispered in Matsumoto's ear, "If you, the so-called first love, do something to hurt you, then you can serve me with peace of mind in the future. If he doesn't do it, then I can answer your condition, you can bring it up." "Oh. Are you really casually mentioning it?" Matsumoto Yurika also raised her eyebrows, stroked her chin, pondered for a moment, and then showed a smile. "Yoshi, I bet you." "Very good." Fantasy nodded in satisfaction and continued to lean in Matsumoto's ear, "I'm waiting for the teacher. The day I'm under my weight, and it won't be too long. Maybe tonight is enough." "Hello, hello." Matsumoto Yuri looked angry with her hands crossed over her waist, but before she could say anything, someone came here again. Turning her head, she found that it was Xiaolan and Yuenzi, as well as Conan, a child named Death God. Seeing them, Yurika Matsumoto was undoubtedly very happy. "Ah, it's Maori and Suzuki, you guys are here." "Hello, Yuenzi, it's been a long time since we last saw each other." Huanmeng greeted them with a smile. Upon hearing Huanmeng's words, Yunzi was taken aback for a moment, carefully examined Huanmeng, and soon remembered, Are you a Huanmeng? It seems that Yunzi still remembers me. Huanmeng smiled and walked to the front of the garden to give her a hand kiss, then waved to everyone. Don't disturb your old memories, I'll go out first. After Fantasy finished speaking, he left directly with Quantum. Conan looked at Fantasy's back strangely, not sure if he remembered having such a junior high school classmate before, but it seemed insignificant. Wedding can be lively and interesting at times, but at other times it can be quite boring. Most of the people who come here are people that Fantasy doesn't know, so Fantasy can only drink a glass of juice alone, with an inexplicable smile on the corner of his mouth. He coldly watches the guests talking here, as if he is an outsider. Quantum, dressed in maid attire, stood aside, looking at the bustling banquet hall and then at the hallucinations. At this moment, she suddenly felt that the hallucinations might be very lonely. Perhaps it was because she had been alone for too long that she had become what she was now. This kind of personality seemed a bit bad to her. Not long after, suddenly came the sound of someone shouting that something was wrong. Upon hearing this sound, Fantasy looked in the direction of the bride and immediately smiled, it's starting. After taking a sip of the juice from the glass, he put the glass aside and walked slowly towards the other side. However, Quantum secretly sighed, his personality was really not good. Matsumoto Kobayashi was poisoned, and just as the wedding was about to take place, she was in danger of losing her life. It seemed like a tragedy, but there was still a faint smile on her dreamy face. Tragedy was actually predetermined from the beginning. Squeezing through the crowd, she arrived at Matsumoto Kobayashi's side and quietly inserted a pill into her mouth without attracting anyone's attention. With this, she was guaranteed not to be in danger of her life. I won, Miss Little Lily, she said softly and quickly had someone take her to the hospital. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 7. The Collapsed Groom and Little Lilies. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Because it was the daughter of the chief police officer who had an accident, the police acted very quickly. In about 10 minutes, all the police who were supposed to come were present, and the investigation work quickly began. This is sometimes the case in this world, where people with power and influence have more privileges than ordinary people. Of course, in the fantasy view, things like power and money are more likely to give birth to demons. There was an open can of lemon tea on the floor that fell there. It was obvious that it needed to be checked, and the forensic police quickly concluded that it was sodium hydroxide poisoning. With Conan's reminder, they also found some residue from the capsule, so it was obvious that someone had intentionally poisoned it. In this way, it has been some time since the poison was dissolved, so there is no way to determine the time of the crime, said the Momu Police Department, looking at Xiaolan Yunzi and others, including the bridesmaids, groomsmen, Groom, and Conan. That is to say, the 6 of you who entered and exited the bride's room are all suspected of putting the poison into lemon tea, and you cannot leave here. How could that be? Are you even a suspect? The groom seemed a bit incredulous, but Officer Mu wouldn't exclude him just because he was the groom. Of course, he said, looking at the forensic police again. Take a good look. Yes. Nah, Conan suddenly walked up to Inspector Matsumoto and pointed at him, saying to Officer Momo, don't you count this person too? This old man also came to the bride's room, he's a suspect, isn't he? Hey, would the chief inspector give his daughter to? No, this child is right. In theory, I am also one of the suspects. Inspector Matsumoto has no objection to listing himself as a suspect, regardless of the relationship. If there is suspicion, it is suspicion, and there is nothing to say. On one side, the illusion was too lazy to pay attention to these issues and walked directly to the side of the Mu Mu Police Department. Although it was strange for Mu Mu Police Officer, he also followed what the illusion said and asked the police to follow suit. During this period, everyone watched the footage captured by the camera brought by Xiaolan Yuanzi together. They saw Matsumoto Xiaolili placing lemon tea on the table, and then the camera ran out of power. Then, a snowflake appeared on the screen, and then it turned sideways. Wait. Fantasy suddenly spoke up, pointing to the bottle of lemon tea on the screen and saying, "Detective Mu, there's a problem with this lemon tea. You can go back and take a look." Oh. The Mu Police Department nodded, flipped the video back a bit, carefully looked at it, and seemed to have noticed something. They then placed the video on the screen when it was deflected, carefully looked at it, and suddenly looked surprised. The direction of the lemon tea label is reversed. Well, that's right. Fantasy nodded, and the others in the room were also a bit surprised. They couldn't figure out what the situation was, but Conan seemed to have realized something. However, at this moment, no one paid attention to him. Huanmeng looked around at the people and then turned his gaze to Yuanzi. Yuanzi, if you guessed correctly, then only you and little Lily were drinking lemon tea. And when the video arrived here, it seemed like you had left. So, did you go out with lemon tea at that time? No. Yuanzi shook her head, which she still remembered. When she heard her admit, Fantasy couldn't help but smile. Is that so? After saying that, she didn't say anything and continued watching the video. Next, the groom came in, took the lemon tea from Matsumoto Kobayashi's hand, and was then snatched back by Matsumoto Kobayashi. Then Yuanzi and the others came back after watching the video. A police officer from the search class also ran back, holding an evidence bag in his hand. Inside the bag was a small glass bottle containing desiccant, and he directly said to the police department on the screen, "Police department, as you said, we found this outside." Oh. Officer Mu nodded and looked at Huanmeng again. Huanmeng nodded without saying much, and everyone continued to wait. About half an hour later, a forensic police officer hurriedly ran in, holding the jar of lemon tea in his hand, which was naturally the one that caused the poisoning of Matsumoto lilies. He then said directly to the police station on the screen, "Police, we have checked and found no fingerprint of the chief inspector on the surface of this jar, but the fingerprint of Miss Suzuki Yukiko." "Sorry, I know now." The police officer nodded and looked at Huanmeng again. Huanmeng smiled and walked over with a glass of juice. He took a sip of the juice and smacked his mouth before speaking, "So, the situation is already very obvious. Based on the video, it can be inferred that little Lily took the wrong jar of lemon tea, just because two jars overlapped, causing an error. The person who came into contact with little Lily's lemon tea before putting it down in the garden has already ruled out the suspicion. Do you have any objections to this, Inspector Matsumoto, the head of the police department, and the bridesmaids and groomsmen all nodded to indicate that they didn't, and Fantasy continued, "So the next issue is that the capsule also has the glass bottle containing desiccant that we just found. Capsules are just a gimmick for us to incorrectly infer the time of poisoning. The glass bottle that actually contains the poison can be checked to see if it has been filled with poison. Do you have any objections to this?" The crowd shook their heads again, and Fantasy took another sip of juice, smacked her lips, and then curled up a smile. "So, it's very obvious that someone poisoned little Lily during the time from taking it wrong to falling down. Based on the video taken, it can be inferred that the child can be ruled out." Yuanzi and Xiaolan went out, but after returning, they didn't come into contact with lemon tea. And during this period, only little Lily herself and the groom came into contact with lemon tea. Hiss. Fantasy said as she tugged at her hair, seeming very distressed. "Of course little Lily wouldn't commit suicide, so the culprit could only be you, Mr. Groom." Upon hearing this sentence, everyone turned their attention to the groom. Although the reasoning behind the illusion was simple, everyone could understand that the groom was the murderer, and this was a definite fact that he couldn't tolerate sophistry. "Why? Why do you want to treat my daughter?" Inspector Matsumoto grabbed the groom's collar and questioned him loudly. The groom's eyes froze, and he broke free from Inspector Matsumoto's hand and said loudly, "I wanted you to taste the same taste. 20 years ago, your car chasing a criminal suddenly rushed over and caused my innocent mother's death. Do you remember this incident?" Upon hearing this, Captain Matsumoto was taken aback for a moment, then his eyes widened and his pupils narrowed, clearly recalling the past. "At that time, my mother was still alive. If she were to be taken to the hospital in a police car immediately, there would be some help, but you didn't pay any attention. After more than 10 minutes, my mother took her last breath on the roadside. Since then, I have never forgotten your cold and ruthless face. I will never forget it." Looking at the excited expression on the groom's face, the Metropolitan Police Department turned to Inspector Matsumoto and said, "Inspector, is this true?" Although helpless, Chief Matsumoto nodded. "At that time, I was in a hurry to chase the culprit and didn't notice anyone under the car. Later, I found out that an accident had occurred. When I went to find him, they had already moved away." The groom snorted coldly, "I have no other relatives besides my mother. At that time, I was adopted by the Takayasu family, who had no children, and became their adopted son. Then, 7 years ago, I met a girl with my ex-girlfriend Ime. When I knew that girl was your daughter, my revenge flame once again burned fiercely in my heart. If that's the case, why? Why don't you just kill me? Why? If you die, how could you taste the sadness of losing your beloved loved one? I tell you, that guy was also a foolish woman, and I didn't know that I approached her just to seek revenge. From my perspective, she was just interested in the property of the Takayama family." Pop. The bridesmaid next to her slapped the groom directly, and she was Ime, the groom's ex-girlfriend and also Matsumoto Kobayashi's best friend. "You idiot, you don't even know anything. In fact, little Lily knows everything, including the accident 20 years ago and your true identity." "No, it's not true. She knows the truth about me, how could she possibly marry me?" The groom obviously didn't believe it, while Ime continued, "Don't you understand when you see little Lily's lemon tea? The first lover little Lily has been missing is you." Upon hearing this sentence, everyone except for Huanmen looked stunned. However, Huanmen calmly drank the juice and handed the empty cup to Quantum. Without further ado, Quantum went out to help him pour the juice, and at this moment, Ime continued. "Because little Lily has always said that you look like, that's why I helped him investigate your background. After accepting your proposal, little Lily has been very worried because she doesn't know what to do to get your forgiveness, but she didn't expect you to be this kind of person. Difficult. Can you say that she knows it's poisonous?" The groom had an incredulous expression on his face, followed by deep regret. At this moment, Fantasy walked over and moved his hands as he walked, grinning and saying, "Very regretful, isn't it? But it's no use anymore. From the time you put the poison in lemon tea, from the time little Lily drank the poisonous lemon tea, between you, no one owes anyone, first love. What a joke, you don't deserve to say anything about loving her. If you really remember this first love, why haven't you recognized her for so long? I really feel unworthy of little Lily. Bang. Fantasy punched the groom directly and then shook his hand with a disdainful expression, without saying much. Quantum walked in with a glass filled with juice. Fantasy took the glass and drank it all in one gulp. Then, he smacked his lips and placed the glass aside, waving his hand directly at everyone. "Goodbye, everyone," he said. "Wait." Inspector Matsumoto called off Mirage, who was about to leave. He stared at Mirage and asked, "Little Lily, who are you? What is your relationship with little Lily? What's the matter?" Fantasy turned her head to look at Chief Matsumoto, then gave a smile. "Dangerous." After saying this, she turned around and left without looking back. "There's nothing fun here." Chief Matsumoto, the police inspector, watched the disappearance of his dream and remained silent for a long time. He could only sigh helplessly, as if he was quite useless. But without saying much, the police began the follow-up work, waiting for the groom to be the ruthless iron doors and windows of the prison, which was an undecided matter. After leaving the wedding scene, Fantasy did not go home, but directly took the little maid Quantum to the hospital where Matsumoto Kobayashi was located. With her own pill, Matsumoto Kobayashi would not have any problems. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 8. The little Lily unable to escape, completely returning to her heart. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The hospital was actually not far away, and it arrived shortly after. It seemed to have arrived at the right time, and Matsumoto Eureka also woke up at this time, which surprised the doctors. When it was first delivered, there were indeed signs of poisoning. But as soon as they were ready for the surgery, they found that all the patient's indicators had become very normal and there were no signs of poisoning at all. After several self-examinations, it was still like this, which was a bit unbelievable. But Fantasy had no intention of talking nonsense to them and drove them out of the hospital room. There were only 3 of them left in the room. Matsumoto Eureka lay in bed, feeling a bit lonely. Fantasy pulled up a chair and sat down next to the hospital bed. She picked up an apple next to her and started peeling it with a knife. It seems that my case has already been resolved, said Matsumoto Kobayashi with a helpless smile as she gazed at her dream for a long time. Well, it's a small joke. Dream lightly sliced, peeled the skin, put the knife aside, and took the apple and bit it directly. Seeing him like this, Matsumoto Eureka shook her head again helplessly. I thought you were peeling an apple for me, but I didn't expect it to be for me. You really don't know how to take care of girls. The person who lost the bet with me has no human rights. Huanman curled up a smile at the corner of her mouth. Matsumoto Yuri naturally knew what he was saying, but could only sigh inwardly. She thought it was just a joke, but now she has really lost, completely lost. Her first love and everything have come to an end with poison. Fantasy took another bite of the apple and chewed on it. Looking at Matsumoto Yuri, she suddenly pulled up her chair and sat closer. Taking advantage of Matsumoto Yuri's lack of reaction, she lowered her head and kissed her passionately. Matsumoto Yuri also had no strength to struggle and could only let it bully her. Quantum looked at the man and woman in the passionate kiss and sighed helplessly again. He knew that this would be the case. Fantasy was really looking for opportunities, but he was still a bit curious. How could Fantasy know that the groom would poison the bride? Do you still have the ability to predict? It took a long time for the dream to come to an end. He sat back there and bit the unfinished apple, looking at the little lily of Matsumoto, whose face had turned red a lot. He then curled his lips and smiled. Oh, I'm feeding you apple juice. It's enough to take care of you, isn't it? It also saved you the strength of biting yourself. Humph. Matsumoto Yuri snorted, but didn't say anything further. She was still a bit weak now, and today's incident had a big impact on her. Anyway, her mood was a bit restless now. Fantasy didn't say anything more. When he finished eating the apple in his hand, he found out a necklace with a flame-shaped ruby from nowhere. It was exactly the same as the one he had brought to Yoko Okano. He put the necklace on little Lily Matsumoto, and then said with a smile. Oh, since you lost the bet, then you will be my person from now on. From now on, you can't let anyone enjoy your body. Otherwise, the flames from hell sealed in the necklace will burn people to the point of leaving no residue. You are already completely mine. Talking about the flames of hell, are you still a demon? Matsumoto Eureka felt a bit amused, but Fantasy didn't joke with her. She still wore that inexplicable smile on her face. Of course, I am the demon that has descended into this world. With a snap of her finger, she saw the flame-shaped ruby of the necklace suddenly emerge and a flame floating there, which stunned Yuri Matsumoto. Mirage snapped her finger again, and the flame returned to the ruby. See, you can rest assured and be my own forbidden zone in the future. You. Yuri Matsumoto looked at Dream with a somewhat incredulous expression on her face. The smile on Dream's face still didn't fade away. I'm really a demon. She stood up and stretched lazily. All right, your father is probably coming to see you soon. I'll go back first. Here's my current contact information and address. If you need anything, you can call me or come directly to me. I'll help you. After finishing speaking, she left with the quantum, and Matsumoto Eureka watched their disappearing figures. She grabbed the necklace around her neck with her right hand, gently stroking the ruby, and sighed helplessly. Is this considered a mistake that will last forever? I wandered outside for a while, and by the time I returned to the exchange, night had already fallen. To my surprise, there was someone waiting outside the exchange door. I also knew this person, and they had been spending spring night together a few days ago. That's right, the person who came was Yoko Chonya. Seeing Yoko Okano, Fantasy blinked her eyes and immediately gave a slightly dangerous smile. She opened the door and invited someone in, allowing Quantum to prepare dinner and juice. She sat opposite Yoko Okano, with a smile on her face that didn't diminish. She asked directly, "Did you miss me after 2 days of absence?" Upon hearing Phantom's words, Yoko Ono bit her lips and continued, "I want to know if it was Yuko Chi who used me to trade with you, and what did she trade?" According to the trading rules, the trading principle and the specific items of the transaction cannot be disclosed to others. Huanming shrugged and looked at Yoko Okano, smiling again. "However, since you are all my people now, it's okay to tell you that it was indeed Yuko Chi who came to me for a transaction. It's very cost-effective. You traded 2 songs, or more accurately, 3 songs, and 2 of them will still be popular for at least a while. There will be one more popular idol in the future." Upon hearing Fantasy say this, Yoko Okano clenched her lips, feeling the bitterness of being betrayed, especially now that her life seems to have turned into a dark one. After thinking for a moment, Yoko Okano gritted her teeth and said, "So, I'll also trade with you, take myself, and she'll be ruined. You are already mine, the transaction agreement cannot be established. You're just the one who got me. As long as you help me, my people and my heart will be yours in the future. To be honest, it doesn't matter to me whether or not I have your heart, as long as I have the person who gets you." Huanming shrugged nonchalantly and looked at Yoko Okano, who had bitten her lips until they turned white. He blinked his eyes, then grinned and said, "Okay, your heart really doesn't belong to me, and it can be used to make a deal with me. So this deal is officially established, and the trading time is 3 months. After all, the previous deal with Yuko Ikazawa made her a popular idol. In 3 months, she released a song and her popularity skyrocketed, which was enough. And the illusion at this point revealed a dangerous smile. It seems even more fun to have her go from nothing to heaven, and then from heaven to hell. Seeing the smile on the dreamy face, Yoko Okano felt a chill all over her body. The young man in front of her was really dangerous, or rather, a demon who played with everything. Fantasy Dream didn't have the leisure to reason about what Yoko Okano was thinking. After looking at Yoko Okano, she immediately snapped her fingers, pulled the window curtains back up, and the door closed. It didn't leave Yoko Okano puzzled for long, so she stood up and pulled Yoko Okano out of her seat, and started laughing in the office of this exchange. Bang! As they heard the sound of glass shattering, Fantasy and Yoko Okano turned their heads to see that it was Quantum with a shocked expression. The glass shattering was due to the glass she was holding, which was filled with juice, falling to the ground. Perhaps she was frightened by the scene before her. A simple girl would not have no reaction when faced with such a thing. Her face turned red and she quickly hid in the kitchen. She couldn't help but complain about Huanmeng, who dares to act recklessly. The passion lasted from 7 o'clock when night fell until 9 o'clock at night before it finally came to an end. The little maid waited for the sound to disappear, but still didn't dare to come out. She waited for about half an hour. Presumably, they had already packed up in the dream, and then walked out with a red face carrying the reheated food. However, walking was a bit awkward, as they were forced to stop listening to the live spring palace for 2 hours. Yoko Okano had not yet left, and at this moment, she leaned back on the sofa as if she was a bit detached. Fantasy Dream looked refreshed, and Quantum had prepared the food. She was about to escape from here, but was grabbed by Fantasy Dream. It's really getting too much. Quantum thought to herself this way, but she knew she couldn't escape and couldn't resist. She also had a sense of resignation. Yoko Chonya looked at the young girl who was kissing and hugging her, and thought of the passion just now. She couldn't help but blush. Although she had no emotional foundation with Dream, she did everything she needed to do and couldn't even run away. Perhaps accepting fate was a good choice. I had a somewhat uneasy dinner, but after stumbling and stumbling, I finally finished it. At this point, Yoko Okano, who had recovered a lot, also planned to leave. Before leaving, he hesitated for a moment before speaking to Fantasy Dream. I'm going to film these 2 days. Can you go visit the group? Things have already turned out like this, and we can't escape. It's better to spend some time cultivating relationships than to spend the next half of life without any emotions. At least that's what Yoko Okano thinks. Fantasy didn't have such thoughts, but considering that there was still some time before the Qiben family's wedding and there didn't seem to be anything else to do within that time, she nodded and said, "Sure, I'll go then and see if there were any kissing scenes, if there were." As she spoke, Fantasy smiled dangerously again. If there were, then there was no need for the crew to exist. Upon hearing Fantasy's words, Yoko Okano felt a bit chilly here, but didn't dare to say anything. She said goodbye and went home, thinking about whether she should also change her agent. She needed to replace her current male agent with a female agent. Otherwise, it's uncertain when Fantasy would be unhappy and destroy her. After a moment of wild thought, all I could do was show a bitter smile. Life is really bitter. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 9. Selling to Miyako, Douyuan and Yoko. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. What it looks like to shoot a TV drama. I don't know or want to know, that kind of false life is not what he wants. What he wants is a real life. For him, the so-called reality is the darkness of the human heart. He believes that this is the most real in the world, and he has long been accustomed to the darkness, hypocrisy, cunning, greed human heart. Sometimes it is actually a very ridiculous thing. Quantum still couldn't take off her maid costume. No matter where she went, she had to wear it. This time when she went to visit Yoko Okano, she also knew Yoko Okano. She knew Yoko Okano and realized that this big star had become a forbidden zone for Fantasy, and that she was still traded. It felt a bit unbelievable. But thinking about it, it's not something that's unacceptable. After all, she heard with her own ears that Qiben Shoujiang used her sister to trade with Fantasy Dream. Now someone is using Yoko Okano to trade with Fantasy Dream. It seems like it's just a small scene. Through the introduction of Yoko Okano, I got to know the director, other actors and other characters, as well as Mori Kagoro, who was invited to serve as a detective consultant. Then there was nothing else to do. Fantasy stood by with Quantum and Xiaolan, which made Fantasy feel very boring because he didn't even have a cup of freshly squeezed juice. Do Fantasy Lord also know Miss Yoko? While waiting, Xiaolan took the initiative to chat with Fantasy Dream. She wasn't a stranger, but rather a friend. Fantasy Dream often eats and drinks at her house. Upon hearing Xiaolan's inquiry, Huanmeng wore a faint smile on her face. This time, it was really just an ordinary smile. Of course we know each other, our relationship is still very good. Can we all roll the sheets together and have a bad relationship? Of course, this good relationship was only imagined by fantasy. In fact, Yoko Okano and he had only met a few times, not counting this time, only 3 times. When we first met, we didn't even introduce ourselves. On the second meeting, we were overwhelmed by fantasy. The third meeting was also similar, but now it's still a bit normal. Of course, Xiaolan didn't know anything about this. Simply because she had agreed with Fantasy Dream, she thought their relationship was really good. However, after looking at the quantum around her, she asked, Fantasy Dream Lord, who is this young lady? Why is she wearing maid attire? Well, she's Quantum, now she's my little maid. Fantasy glanced at Quantum and put on an inexplicable smile at the corner of her mouth. Of course, she will be the same in the future. Upon hearing Phantom's words, Quantum had no further reaction. She understood that from the moment she entered the exchange, her future fate had already been predetermined. She was just an ordinary person, unable to escape the clutches of Phantom, the demon. Xiaolan didn't think much about it. She started talking to Quantum with a smile, and Fantasy could only casually take out an apple from her body and bite it. It didn't matter to him if he didn't talk to anyone. The so-called gods wouldn't talk to mortals, they would only watch coldly in that unknown place. The filming continued until dusk, and today's scene was finally completed. Mori Kagoro quickly ran to Yoko Okano with a towel to pay his respects. Fantasy watched, but he didn't pay attention. Anyway, Mori Kagoro wouldn't really do anything. If he wanted to do it, the necklace would directly burn him to ashes. Yoko Okano glanced at Huanmeng and found that she was not angry or anything like that. She breathed a sigh of relief, but she didn't dare to get too close to Mori Kagoro. She didn't know if the necklace would really burn people to ashes, and she didn't dare to try. The consequences were not something she could afford, and she wouldn't have any thoughts about uncles like Mori Kagoro. However, a girl next to her named Misako Douyuan caught the attention of Fantasy for a moment. After thinking for a moment, she walked over to the girl with a smile and extended her hand, saying, "Hello, Misako." "Oh, hello." Miyako Douyuan responded, but she also had some doubts about the sudden arrival of Fantasy Dream. Fantasy Dream didn't make her puzzled for a long time, so she spoke up and said, "My name is Fantasy Dream, and I have opened a fantasy hall exchange. Whether it's fame and fortune, money, honor, social status, or other people's lives, they can all be traded. As long as you come up with something equivalent, it's enough." Handing. Trading. Douyuan Miaozi was stunned for a moment, not knowing why Fantasy suddenly said these things to herself, but she didn't believe much. How could such a thing happen? She didn't believe it, and the illusion didn't provide much explanation. She just smiled and turned around before leaving, "Feel free to come find me anytime." Douyuan Miaozi looked at the back of the phantom and then shook her head, feeling a bit inexplicable. After packing up the props and other items for the shoot, everyone went to the hotel. However, one male actor ran to the hotel alone, saying that it was the only way to fit his identity. The illusion only curled up the corners of his mouth and showed a smile, "My heart." Fantasy is not picky about where she lives. She went to the hotel with the crew, took a shower, changed into clothes, and Mori Kagoro and the director went drinking on the side. Fantasy was too lazy to get involved, so she was in another room with Yoko Okano, Quantum, and the little kid Conan. With his head resting on Quantum's thighs, he flipped through Yoko Okano's script to see if there were any kissing or intimate scenes. He wasn't just talking about it. If there were, he wouldn't mind clearing out the person who wrote the script, the director, and even the vast majority of the crew. Okano, Yoko and Xiaolan chatted happily, and Quantum occasionally interjected a few words. However, when Xiaolan asked how Okano Yoko met Fantasy, Okano Yoko couldn't say anything, and Quantum didn't know how to say it. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward, and Xiaolan was puzzled by what she had said wrong. On the other hand, Conan beside him keenly sensed that there must be something difficult to say about it, but he dared not casually ask questions or investigate, although he was also quite curious. Okano Yoko didn't remain silent for too long, so she quickly changed the topic and asked Xiaolan if she wanted to go out and buy something. Xiaolan didn't think much and nodded in agreement. Then Okano Yoko had to change clothes, and Fantasy was naturally kicked out. Although we all rolled over the sheets together, we naturally had to avoid what we should avoid in front of outsiders. Of course, before leaving, Fantasy also brought up Conan as a guy. He knew the details of this guy, so he couldn't stay inside. They went out, but Fantasy didn't join in the fun. Quantum also went along, leaving Fantasy alone in the room to drink juice and read the script, while waiting for the Douyuan Miyako to come and trade with them. However, what surprised Fantasy this time was that even when the police came to inform him that something had happened, the Douyuan Miyako didn't come to find him. Ah, it seems that I failed to attract business this time. Huanmeng tugged at her hair with some annoyance, making herself look very headache-free. However, she immediately became indifferent again. Well, forget it, in life, it's impossible for everything to go according to my original script. Occasionally encountering unexpected situations is also good, otherwise life wouldn't be too boring. Haha. With a light smile, he casually threw aside the script for Yoko Ono and walked outside while biting an apple. The location of the murder occurred at the shrine where the previous filming took place. The photographer of the crew died, and the police department leading the team was also the Mumu Police Department. At this time, the investigation and evidence collection had already begun. Upon seeing the illusion, the Metropolitan Police Department was also a bit happy. In addition to the newly rising detective, Kagoro Mori, there was also a powerful detective boy. Brother Fantasy, you're also here. Can you help investigate? Sorry, Mumu Police Department. Huanmeng smiled at Mumu Police Department. This time I didn't have anyone involved in the case, nor did anyone bet with me. I didn't have the leisure to reason about any cases. Why waste your energy solving cases and you don't have your own clients or anyone to bet on, which is not beneficial to yourself? Hey, why is that so? The Mumu Police Department couldn't believe it a bit. Aren't you a detective, Brother Fantasy? You even opened an office. No, I run an exchange, not a detective agency. Fantasy shook her head, grabbed an apple and took another bite, indicating that the case was not as tempting as biting an apple. But upon hearing the words of the illusion, the Mumu Police Department became a bit conflicted. Exchange. What is this? A newly emerging profession. It's nothing, it's just a trade where everyone takes what they need, Huanmeng shrugged. Whether it's fame, fortune, money, honor, or social status, you can trade, as long as you bring out something equivalent. Sure. The Mumu Police Department nodded knowingly, but felt a bit conflicted. Can Japan still allow such agencies to exist? Can these things really be traded? Are you talking nonsense? Anyway, even if Fantasy doesn't help, the investigation will continue, and the Mumu Police Department hopes that Mori Kagoro can remain as powerful as ever and get the case investigated to the bottom of the water. Fantasy just stood on the side, watching the progress of the matter, holding an apple in his hand and biting it. He didn't know exactly where the apple he took out came from, and it always kept biting non-stop. Yoko Okano looked at the dream and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and made up his mind to come over and cultivate his emotions. It's better to have no emotions at all. That's no different from wild beasts venting their desires. Yoko Okano doesn't want that. Even if his ideal love is gone, he can't do without emotions. You can help investigate, why not help? Help. Fantasy glanced at Yoko Ono and shrugged directly. That's the detective's business, not mine. I run an exchange, not a detective's office. I used to help just because of trading needs, but now I don't need anything. Besides. Speaking of which, Fantasy smiled inexplicably again. Have you ever seen a demon do something that doesn't benefit you at all? Upon hearing Fantasy say this, Yoko Ono really didn't know what to say, but suddenly realized that it seemed quite difficult to cultivate feelings with Fantasy. But no matter what, the case was ultimately resolved. Without the transaction, Fantasy lost the reason to intervene, so things seemed to be no different from the original trajectory. However, regarding the failure of this business solicitation, Fantasy did not take it to heart, and what he cared about was not such a small matter. In the quiet of the night, the situation ended and everyone dispersed. After the case was resolved, everyone dispersed separately. However, in the hotel room, Yoko Okano, a popular idol, was once again overwhelmed by illusions. Sometimes, cultivating a relationship doesn't require much, because over time, it can start. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Chapter 10. The Wedding of Qiben Group, Hypnosis of Qiben. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Time is running out, and 2 more days have passed since the day we went to visit Yoko Chongye. Nothing has happened in the past 2 days, but there have been a few customers who want to trade, just for the purpose of exchanging money. They are holding some messy things, but they can't even dream of it. But I still exchanged money for them, and then threw those things aside. Those who open the door for business, do whatever business they have, and no matter what the business is, there must be rules for doing business. The little girl named Jingzi came over to look for Fantasy Dream these past few days, saying she was going on a trip abroad. So before leaving, she came to see Fantasy Dream. She really liked this guy, maybe because Fantasy Dream helped her fulfill her wish, or because Fantasy Dream snatched her first kiss. Although she didn't know what it meant, it was also unforgettable, and not only was the first kiss, but now when they met, kissing seemed to have become a necessary item. Quantum can be said to despise this, but Fantasy didn't care at all. Instead, he smiled and said, "Everyone has desires, and liking a little girl is also a kind of desire. You can vent your desires as you please, there's nothing impossible." In view of this, Quantum didn't know what to say, but thinking about hallucinations, she didn't do anything more outrageous, so she shook her head and didn't bother to worry too much. Moreover, this was not something she could manage. Apart from Jingzi, Huanmeng also took the initiative to look for Matsumoto Kobayashi once and did not bring Quantum, so Quantum did not know what Huanmeng was doing to find Matsumoto Kobayashi. However, from the situation where Huanmeng stayed outside all night until the next day when he returned, he could also guess what he had done. In fact, it is indeed like that, because Matsumoto Lily has already recovered. Fantasy went to visit and then discussed the nightlife between men and women. People have desires, and Fantasy believes that their desires are still strong and naturally need to vent. And on this day, Fantasy took Quantum out and headed straight to the venue of the Qiben family's wedding. The transaction with Qiben Xiaojiang was almost completed, and then it was time to harvest. Regarding Qiben Xiaojiang, Huanmeng has also paid a little attention in the past few days. She knows that she is a relatively traditional girl who opposes premarital sex, so Qiben Xiaojiang dares to say that her sister is a virgin. Of course, the day after the wedding is not necessarily the same, so Qiben Xiaojiang will let Huanmeng take action as soon as possible. Of course, if she is not a virgin, she does not care. What she hopes more is that Huanmeng can help her obtain inheritance as soon as possible, so as not to have many nightmares. The wedding didn't start until the next day, and Fantasy didn't have much interest in it. However, when the groom and bride wanted to kiss at the end, they waved their hands and blew a strong wind, which destroyed it. Since they were already their own people, it was already very unpleasant for them to hold a wedding with someone else. It was even more impossible to watch her kiss someone else. The final kiss of Liqing was not successful, but it seemed insignificant. Huanmeng grinned and met the people of the Qiben family under the guidance of Qiujiang Qiben. Naturally, she also met her grandfather. Now, the head of the Qiben family, Huanmeng's first impression of this Qiben family head is that his death is coming. Leaving aside appearances and the like, even if that's the memory in my mind, the upcoming cruise seems to be quite fun. After the wedding banquet, there were actually not many people. Their wedding was held on their own island, which is also a tradition, but they also had to hold it outside. It is a big family, so the wedding cannot be so low-key. In the afternoon, the Qiben family and their group boarded the cruise ship, and Fantasy Dream also took the little maid Quantum up to it, citing being invited by Qiben Qiujiang. Anyway, the cruise ship was very large, so they didn't care if there were more of them. However, there were more than just the two of them, as well as the Muri Kagoro family. They seemed to be on a trip, but Muri Kagoro remembered the wrong time and missed the return ship. Fortunately, the ship from the Qiben family passed by and was picked up. Otherwise, they didn't know when they would have to wait before returning. But I didn't expect that you guys from Fantasy were also there. Xiaolan, who was watching the sunset on the sea with Fantasy on the deck, smiled and said. It's still a great feeling to meet her familiar friends at such times. Huanmen glanced at Qiben Xiaojiang, who was inexplicably sentimental on the side, and a slight smile curved around his mouth. Well, I came here because of work, but it's worth it. Oh, Xiaolan nodded, but to be honest, she had never quite understood Fantasy's job, so she still had some doubts. What kind of job is it? Speaking of Fantasy's exchange, I've been struggling to figure it out. I feel a bit embarrassed after saying that, after all, they are all friends and neighbors, and it has been so long. I can't understand my friend's work, which is a bit embarrassing. But the illusion paid no attention to this and shrugged nonchalantly, saying, it's nothing, it's just a trade. You can understand it as a situation where you trade an apple with me for a pear. Oh, Fantasy said, and Xiaolan finally understood a lot, but still had some doubts. For example, what exactly were the transactions, and what was the job that Fantasy came here for? However, Xiaolan did not ask. Simply because it was simple does not mean she was stupid. Business secrets cannot be inquired about casually, even friends cannot. But Xiaolan also noticed Qiben Xiaojiang, who seemed a bit sad on one side, so she walked over and asked. Fantasy glanced at him, but he didn't go to join the fun. As he himself said, exchanging things for things, in his opinion, Qiben Xiaojiang was used to trade items for himself and had no human rights. And who would care about the emotional fluctuations of an item? And at this moment, the groom also walked over. Fantasy couldn't help but squint her eyes. Of course, she couldn't allow anyone else to touch her own things. Should she throw the groom directly into the sea? Before coming up with a specific answer to this question, the old man from the Qiben family over there became angry, mainly because his son-in-law took the initiative to let the Mori Kagoro and his family board the ship. He also scolded his son-in-law's son and then went back to his room. Before leaving, he even let the groom go to his room. Seeing this, Fantasy couldn't help but smile. She looked at Qiben Qiujiang with both hands embracing her chest, nodded directly, and then took the little maid Quantum to the cabin to find the Qiben old man. It was time to complete the transaction. Although the groom would also go later, this was enough time. On the deck, the daughter of the old man Qiben Malizi, persuaded her scolded husband Qiben Kitaro, dear, don't worry. Anyway, Dad is old and won't live long. When he leaves, the entire Qiben group and all the assets of the Qiben family will be yours. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Auntie. You're thinking too naively. Qiben Qiujiang, who was next to her husband, smiled all over his face. Upon hearing her words, Qiben Malizi couldn't help but look at her and frown slightly, saying, what do you mean by this sentence? What else do you know? Humph, don't be surprised when you say it. Kiyomoto Akira still had a smile on his face and whispered in his ear, Grandpa, he planned to let Xiaojiang inherit all the property. I heard that he will announce this matter immediately after returning to Tokyo. How? How could it be, how could it be? Kaliko Kimoto looked incredulous, while Komodo Ryuno, Komodo Akira's husband, leaned against the railing and said somewhat displeased, "Cut, are you joking? I'm in deep debt now, and I must get my property." Kiyomoto Akira glanced at her husband, who was of little use, with a slight displeasure, but then showed a slightly sinister smile. "It's still 20.4 hours until we arrive in Tokyo, and during this time, if we don't find a way. It is obvious that this is tempting my aunt to do something, but even as I look at her with a somewhat grim expression, she shows a hidden disdainful smile. Anyway, I will be the biggest winner, and it doesn't matter what others have to do." Inside the cabin, in Mr. Qiben's room, Mr. Qiben and Fantasy sat down on the reception sofa, while the old butler of the Qiben family in Quantum stood on the side. Huanman glanced at the old man Qiben, picked up his teacup and took a leisurely sip of tea, then took a deep breath. "It's really good tea," he said, took another sip, then put down his teacup. Then he looked at the old man Qiben again, with a smile on his lips. "I heard that the old man Qiben wants to hand over all his property to his granddaughter Qiben Xiaojiang for inheritance." The old man from Qiben, who heard the phrase, "fantasy dream," was stunned for a moment before immediately standing up and staring at Fantasy Dream. "How did you know that? Who the hell are you?" "Well, don't be so excited. Let's sit down and have a good chat." Huanman waved his hand and his voice once again carried an inexplicable charm. The old man Qiben seemed to lose his anger and sat down directly. The smile on Huanman's face became even more obvious. He then looked at the old butler on the side and said, "Could you please help me bring some paper and pens over?" The old butler looked at Fantasy and then at his own master. The old man Qiben nodded and went out to find a pen and paper. Fantasy looked at the old man Qiben again, touched his chin, and found no beard, so he laughed again. "Well, actually I have a better view of Qiben Xiaojiang. How about you hand over all your assets to her for inheritance?" As he spoke, a mysterious and demonic tone reappeared in his voice. "Leave all your assets to Qiben Xiaojiang for inheritance. Now, let's make a will." "Okay, that's okay." The voice of the old man Qiben's voice also became a bit strange, a bit different from usual, but Huanman didn't pay attention. A smile curved around his mouth, and he picked up his teacup and continued to drink. Then he felt a little helpless. Although drinking tea was also quite good, he wanted fresh juice even more. Quantum looked at the old man Qiben and then at Huanman, silently sighing in his heart. Although he didn't know what was going on, it was probably hypnosis or something. However, if Huanman was really a demon, he would directly control the other person's mind without much persuasion. Just control the other person to make a will. Just as he was thinking about it, the old butler also brought back the paper and pen. Mr. Qiben didn't say much nonsense and started writing his will directly. The old butler originally wanted to say something, but in the end, he had to reluctantly give up. In fact, when it comes to writing a will, there should have been a legal notary present, but this problem can be solved by Fantasy. Obtaining the identity of a legal notary is not a difficult task for Fantasy. Even if there is no legal notary, it doesn't matter. With his help, this will can be executed the best. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th.